Welcome to NeedleXChange, conversations on the art of thread. My name's Jamie Chalmers, aka Mr. X-Stitch, and today I'm interviewing Jessica Pile and Robert Ossant. Jessica and Robert are researchers and authors with a specialism in couture embroidery, and in this first part of our NeedleXChange, we explore their new book, The Art of Couture Embroidery, which is a fascinating showcase of the intersection between fashion and needlework. I am no fashion expert, so this was a wonderful chat that enlightened me greatly, as does their book. And we talk about historical garments and understanding the thinking behind haute couture, touching on design, history, and the blurred line between fashion and art. I learned a lot. I think you're going to learn a lot. If you enjoy this episode, make sure you subscribe and share it with someone who loves textiles as much as you do, and I will be back next week with the second part of the chat. So until then, enjoy the show. Right, so I love your book, and for me, I have always stared at the world of fashion from a distance and gone, it's just not for me, because I realise that, like, it's sad, right? I quite like Levi's 502s because they're like Levi 501s, but they have a zip. And once I realised that, then I just buy them all the time on eBay. This is my world of fashion or whatever. So it was a great pleasure to have a look at your book and understand a bit more about fashion, but from an embroidery standpoint, and it's triggered lots of thoughts in my head, which I want to get to. But I think what would be a lovely place to start is if you would care to describe the book, tell us the aim of the book, give us a broad overview of it, and let's see where that takes us.
Shall we take our key contributions? Well, I think a broad overview of the book is we looked at the market, we looked at what books are out there at the moment, and there are lots of instruction books, but they don't really deal with inspiration. They don't really deal with the stories that you can just get straight into stitching. Great, fantastic. But what are you stitching? Why are you stitching? Why is it done this way? Who are the people that have kind of tread this path before? So we tried to marry our skills. As a fashion historian, I can talk till the cows come home about all the designers, their life stories, how they arrived at the success that they did and what their collections mean and what they're trying to communicate. So essentially, when writing the book, that was part of the book. And the other part was really showing people high fashion embroidery, couture embroidery, and how it's done and why it's done, which is over to Jess.
Yeah. So obviously I had my first book, which was fashion embroidery. And that was basically just a look at different techniques which are used in fashion, in couture. And after writing it, I kind of felt like, oh, it doesn't really go into like as much detail as I would want from a book. And that's probably coming from someone that works in the industry. So I really wanted to delve into like the history and the like influences that the designers have, which is why Robert is on board and we did it together. But I wanted people to really understand exactly why you make the choices that you do to execute the embroidery in the way that it is done. So analysis of the embroidery and saying, okay, well, they've used these beads here. Why have they used them? How have they used them? What thread have they used? How are they attached? So that you can understand from the very beginning of your design process to the end of the execution of the embroidery, absolutely every decision you're making and why that has been made. So hopefully it gives people a broad overview of, okay, I can look at this embroidery, I can work out how it's done, I can understand why it's done, and now I can do it myself.
But I would add to that, it's broad and it's deep. It's about getting under the skin, getting a bit deeper, getting a bit closer.
As we call them, the deep dives.
We called them deep dives, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what's quite satisfying, actually. It's multi-layered, isn't it? So if you're a layman like me, you can look through the book and you can get a sense of here are the different designers, here's some examples of their work. And there are many where you've just got like the one shot, haven't you, from certain places. And it reminded me a little bit of sometimes being, when I've done judging for embroidery prizes, like looking through the book, you're like, nice. And every now and again, you're like, oh my God. Because there was, is it Garan Gupta? This big like sculptural piece that like flows over. And I was just like, holy moly, you know, some really interesting stuff. And I love that because I love stuff that I didn't realize I liked until I saw it.
So I've got to interrupt here. I've got to, because there's just a funny story recently. A friend of mine was involved in a small car accident and needed to choose an outfit to go to court with. And I went through the book photographing all the looks where the person's face was covered as her look to demonstrate how she had perfect visibility while reversing her mini. And I realized how many looks cover the face in our book. We obviously have a bit of a thing for that anonymity book. There's a lot, and that is probably the most spectacular. But imagine trying to reverse your car while wearing that dress.
Or just trying to get in the car in that dress.
Get in the car.
I mean, yeah, there's definitely a disconnect, isn't there, between the real world and some of these outfits. So you have those pieces, you have those like shots of individual pieces of work. Then what's very satisfying is, you have these deep dives on some of the more well-established designers, which again, from a layman's perspective, I now feel like I've got a little bit more confidence talking about those. And then you've got these case studies, correct? Where you look at a specific piece and that's where you disassemble it and look at the machine embroidery or the types of beading and that sort of thing. Am I right with that?
Yeah. It's mainly just hand embroidery that we go into the deep dive, but I think we've done.
Yeah, because there were some butterflies, weren't there? I think those are the machine ones that I was thinking of, or is it actually like multi-layered pieces?
So there is the butterflies from Schiaparelli, which I think would have been done by machine, but the way I've taught them is by hand. It's slightly different way they're executed on the catwalk, but yeah.
Yeah. So what's great in that case then is you've got these techniques that you can see and you can see the practical application. So in some ways it's almost like, you're deconstructing it, aren't you? You're taking the end product and then pulling it apart, which gives a lovely context for people to try. Because I think sometimes, I have full disclosure, I haven't read your first book, but when you have these books that teach these techniques, in some ways they're almost a little bit aloof or a little bit abstract, because it's kind of like, here's that thing, but the end product, I don't know. This is great, isn't it? Real world examples.
Why is missing? I think sometimes you get those books and you go, I get, that this is the way I should do the embroidery, but why am I doing it this way? And as creative people, we don't all colour by numbers. Sometimes we want to be free to understand the wider process. And I think that's kind of what we wanted to get at with this book. And you mentioned the deep dives. I'd say the way we talked about it was, we talked about zooming in. In every case, it was kind of like, look at this global view of this person or this brand, and then slowly zoom into their lives, zoom into their collections, zoom into a piece, zoom into the embroidery on that piece, zoom into the technique. So it kind of just keeps digging down.
And I think that when I have looked in embroidery books, because obviously the embroidery is so vast and huge that you can't ever know every technique that existed. Whenever I've used a reference book or gone into a book to learn a new technique, often the approaches to execute a project. Okay, this is the embroidery and this is how you do it. And sometimes I'm left going, well, yeah, as Robert just said, like, why? Like, I don't understand. Okay, I want to now take this technique and put it into something else, but I don't really understand why I'm doing it this way, or the reasons why I've chosen this thread, or why can I design it here, and what are my parameters? So hopefully, it gives a broader idea of like the lead up to actually executing the embroidery and the technique. Yes, I think, sometimes it blows my mind sometimes when I've done like exhibitions with embroiderers who are so vastly experienced, and then I go, oh, okay, well, can we have the embroidery like framed? And they're like, well, I don't know how I do it outside of the actual embroidery hoop. And I'm like, you can't, it's so focused on the embroidery hoop, and then it's not like you need to think about it outside of the box and what happens after that.
That's interesting. Yeah. Did, with the book, then, was it quite easy making your selections? I guess there were some obvious choices. And again, I don't know what I don't know here. Was it hard to choose the designers? Did you have loads of designers that didn't make the cut?
We set about making a list at the beginning of designers we wanted. And one of the things we were quite keen to do is make sure that it wasn't just a continuous list of famous white men. So we wanted to make sure there was a lot of diversity and mix in there. But then we were shackled immediately by the fact that, they had to be working at an incredibly high standard. They had to be using embroidery in their collections. They had to have the right embroidery that we could analyze and zoom into and look at. So we did find ourselves struggling at times. Like, there's one designer that we wrote a whole chapter on, and then in the end, they got whittled down to just inclusion. There's another very famous female British designer that we absolutely should have had in the book, but we couldn't find the rights to the image that we wanted. And so she wasn't included. So I would say that was one of the harder bits of the whole thing. Actually writing the book, when you felt free to go, I can actually write now about this person because we have everything we need, including the rights to the images, boom, then you just attack it. But that wasn't always the case.
We had so many designers in the list, didn't we? It was insane. And then ended up being, what, 47? Is that what we landed on in the end?
I think so, or 44. I don't know. I went through and manually counted at the time, but I've forgotten.
It's enough.
Are there any designers who, after you'd kind of done your research and dived into them, are there any designers who you felt differently about, or who maybe earned a greater respect from you because of their approaches?
That's probably more Robert question, because you did that's your area. You're the one that looks at the history. I mean, you kept texting me throughout the whole process of the book being like, oh my God, I can't believe this person did this, or oh my God. Like, oh yeah.
Maybe it's obvious to a lot of people about the designers from the interwar period, like Schiaparelli, Chanel, and Dior. I fell in love with them. I kind of fell down a rabbit hole. I felt like I lived with them. I felt like I lived in that in-between war period and really got a feel for it. You came up with so many fantastic facts as well about Schiaparelli going to New York on the boat, and we really kind of got into their lives, maybe more than the book actually even warranted. But it was because I think we wanted to understand them to enough of an extent that when they make these decisions about their designs and their embroidery, we kind of understand where it comes from because we understand what they've lived through. I think the surprise for me, I'm going to have to be really honest here and hold my hands up, but generally with Italian designers, the Dolce & Gabbanas of the world, the Gucci's, the Pradas, I've always been a bit dismissive, thinking, well, it's a bit vulgar, it's this, it's that. I've kind of got a newfound respect for all of those now. And when I watch the shows now, I'm not as dismissive as maybe I once was. I'm more rounded as a human being as a result of writing this book.
But what's prompted that?
I think it's looking closely. It's an opportunity it's like anything. You can be dismissive of it until you take the time to look at it. And then you go, actually, this is brilliant. And I think that was the case.
So is their work vulgar, or is it just, I don't know, apologies to any Italian listeners. Some countries have certain inbuilt patriarchal narratives, trying to find a good way to phrase it.
I would say what I dismissed as vulgar, there's nothing wrong with vulgar. Vulgar is an expression, an aesthetic expression that has validity in its own right. But it's so much more interesting than that. And you can go right back to Mussolini and start seeing how Fendi developed a lot of its aesthetic based on this crazy Mussolini ruling the country and wanting to have the equivalent of what Paris had in terms of Italian couture, which became alta moda. So I think whenever you look at something and you just learn a little bit more about it, your mind opens, and hopefully your things that would once have been dismissed now get embraced as exciting and interesting. But it's Italian architecture, but it's clothing. So if you like Italian architecture and you spend the time, you can also like Italian clothing. And now I do. I still won't get Prada glasses, though. I was adamant I won't be one of those people with a pair of Prada glasses.
Is there like soft power, though, that sort of thing?
Fashion is definitely soft power, I think. And it's one of the strengths that Europe has that I guess America kind of doesn't. If an American designer becomes sufficiently talented or warrants heading up a big house, they invariably head over to Europe to head one of the houses over here, because there isn't the same cachet with the American. Obviously, there are amazing American designers, Ralph Lauren, Tom Ford, but we have most of them, and the world wants them,
Yeah. It's funny the way that's panned out, isn't it? Is that just the legacy of history, or is it just one of those naturally occurring things, I feel like the UK, for our size, we've got like the best music scene on the planet. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. We're a lot of rich countries all smushed together. So I guess we're a great, powerful trading bloc.
I wasn't actually saying anything that interesting. I just said, I think we did have a very good music industry. I don't know whether we can quite say it's the same now, but
it's just one of those things, isn't it? It's like just the way, oh God, what was it? Like say spice routes and stuff. There are some things that happen in some places where it's just the way the world is constructed. And I feel like there is something about fashion and access to fabrics and access to colours and those sorts of things that made some of these countries real sweet spots, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to go right into history.
I am. Go on. You're the history buff. Come on.
I think if you do go into the history of it, you will see, we had Opus Anglicanum, which was this expression of religious embroidery for the church. And obviously the church was based in Rome and briefly in the south of France. So we had the church, and that required all of this fantastic embroidery. Then, of course, like you say, we had the connections to the Far East, where we had things like the Silk Route, where we had better access to materials. We had immigrants. I mean, now they talk about, immigrants want to go to America, but Europe was the immigration destination of its day. So you had people coming to Europe and bringing their skills and talents. So it was a big draw of people like the Huguenots and others. I mean, the tambour needle even arrived in Europe twice on two different influxes of immigrants. So if you take that as an example, you can say that we were kind of being bombarded over the decades, over the centuries, with all of these skills that were required to take us up to where we are now, where we have those. And we preserved them as well. You know, France in particular, Britain does its bit. We try and preserve these crafts and respect them.
And we build the infrastructure that gets us here today, really. That's what I think we have that is of benefit over what they have in America. They don't necessarily have the historical infrastructure of all the things that Robert's just spoken about.
Yeah. Cool. I love a bit of history. It makes me feel, it took me a long time. Like, I remember when I started out and I was Mr. X-Stitch, and I'm just making it up as I go along. And then at some point I went to the Ashmolean Museum and I stared at some Chinese textiles from like 750 BC or something. I just went, oh my God, history. You know what I mean? Like, suddenly you're just like, oh my God, because you could be involved in, I don't know, collectible toys made of plastic, and your history goes back 100 years if you're lucky. Whereas we're in like this like millennia.
But it's also, I mean, it disintegrates. I think once Jess and I were at an archive in Amsterdam, I think, was it? Oh no, it was Leiden. And we saw a piece of textile that basically dated from 2000 years ago. And it was just a little tiny box and these little tiny crisscrosses that you had to look through with a magnifying glass. And it was a piece of textile the size of your thumbnail. But at the same time, it was like, this literally dates back 2000 years. That's amazing. And it was from the Middle East. So both of us immediately assumed it was like Jesus's loincloth.
Had to be Jesus. He was the only guy. Had to be. Why would they keep it otherwise? That's brilliant. The book is not, I would say, a book for beginners, but it is a book for people who level up. I mean, my feeling is what it does is it a little bit unapologetic about the skills that are required. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. If someone was a new needleworker or a young embroiderer, do you think that they would be inspired by the book or intimidated by the book or both?
Good question.
I think that hopefully should be inspired. I think that was the main aim of the book. I guess we spent a long time, as we've already spoken about, deciding on the designers and ensuring that the quality of the images that we put in could really represent the embroidery that we were talking about. I was adamant that I wanted to get really close pictures of the embroidery so people can see. I think a lot of the time when you're looking at fashion images or catwalk images, you can't actually see the embroidery on them. Even when you go onto like Vogue Runway, it's sort of sad sometimes, you know, you see this amazing piece on the catwalk and the photographer has taken photos of the shoes, photos of the bag, photos of the earrings, photos of the hair, photos of the makeup, and they have taken literally no photos of the embroidery. So you're like, How do I get that? How do I get to that? Like, I need to see it. So being able to open the book and look at it, the images there should inspire you to like want to learn more about embroidery. I'm going to do a plug here, but like, if you want to go back to the basics, buy my first book.
Yeah, great shout.
One thing we talked about though during the book is, you know, so much you can just look up on YouTube and learn how to do. And it feels like it's a waste of space in the book if we're trying to teach people some basics. And it's not necessarily the stitches that are being instructed in the book are difficult. If you look at the Christian Dior piece, it's split stitch. I don't embroider and I could do that, but it's more about how you approach this idea. And the execution is a simple stitch, but you're thinking about the creativity around it and why they've chosen it to do it this way and looking at the fantastic pictures for inspiration. So yeah, I think maybe more books like this are required because people out there have the skills. They probably just need to go deeper and push themselves further. And hopefully this book offers that.
Yeah, I think you've hit the right balance. That's the thing, you know, I think it's the inspiration and it dials backwards from there. And there is that gap. And you're quite right, because if you got into the weeds about some of that stuff, then it would dilute the purpose of the book.
Here's how to thread a needle.
Yeah, that we spoke about that a lot, didn't we? I was like, oh, do I put in here, because obviously I was dealing with the practical side of it, like how to frame up, how to like put the fabric on a frame. And I was like, we're going to just waste so much of the book by explaining this when every single embroidery book that I open has this in it. So like, just go and look at another book, and then you can get more out of the book that we written than you would if we had put that bit about how to frame in or how to thread a needle. I mean, we touch on it in certain elements, and like I think in the first chapter, but it doesn't overshadow what we're actually trying to achieve by giving you the most amazing designers and talking about those.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think you've hit it. You've just found that right balance there. It reminds me of, so last March I did an exhibition at the Stitch Festival, and as what usually happens whenever I do these things, I go to the Royal School of Needlework. I'm like, hi, let's have some students come and teach some cross stitch, which is always a nice, easy thing for them to do. But what I love, and it happened this time, is you get this situation where you get first year degree students hanging out with second year degree students or even third year degree students. And it's so funny because the first years stare with amazement at the quality of the work that the second years have pulled off, while the second years are slightly cringing at their end of year sampler pieces. Do you know what I mean? Because they're looking back and going, oh my God, I'm so much better than that. And I just love that. I love the distance that's traveled that those people go through. And that's in a way what I wonder with this book. Hopefully it inspires, but there's, if someone was listening now and you were saying, Jess, this is the start, you're at the start of something, you can do this, you can grow into it. Like, what's the wisdom there? Because I think it is just putting in the reps, but I'm not a professional at this. So I wonder what you would say.
Well, I don't necessarily, again, think that it's all about the execution. Yes, you can be very good at laying your stitching, but you do need to understand the process to get there, because if you're using the wrong beads or putting it in the wrong place or using the wrong base fabric or not supporting it or not understanding how to design it in a way that, we're talking about embroidery on a garment. So like, how are you designing that for the garment? Where are you placing that embroidery? How does it fit? Where does it sit on a seam? Is it working with a dart? Is it being placed on a fabric that can't hold it? You need to know all of that. And that does come from experience. But hopefully in the book, you can see how I've analysed the book, the pieces, and broken it down, and then start to learn how you can do that for yourself. A lot of it is experience. So you've got to start somewhere.
Just to prove your own humanity, have you got any stories about when it really didn't quite work the way you expected?
Oh, when it's gone wrong? Yeah, loads. I mean, obviously in my long life of working in embroidery, I've had many a time, specifically machine embroidery, where you'd like sew the front of a jumper to the back of the jumper, and it's like literally stitched together and the frame is like stuck around it, and you'd be like, the only way to undo this is just to cut the jumper off. So I've done that multiple times. I've stitched things. I did a curtain once, a really, really long curtain, and we rolled it. It was in hand embroidery and it was in gold work, and we rolled it to send it. And then when we unrolled it, the like passing had stretched. So then all the embroidery was bumpy, and these curtains were like 6 meters long. And we had to spend maybe a week re-pulling all the passing back through under each like couched area all the way. I know, it was just a nightmare.
I don't even know how you would send that without rolling it up and to preserve the pattern.
There wasn't another option. Yeah, I think in the end we did actually just like fold it. We folded it.
So it was only messed up at certain points.
Yeah, and then when we went to the curtain maker, we went with him. But you can only learn by experience. And like I was like, this is the way that we have to send it, is where we have to roll it. And then I opened it and I was like, this is not the way we should send it.
That's good. I like it because I wanted just to ground it, because otherwise the thing that gets me about the world of fashion and embroidery in this sense is it feels sometimes, and even some of the pieces in the book feel like they're disconnected from the world that we stand in, you know, and it's a fascinating thing. And like one of the things I realize now is it's just like there's a big gap between what the consumer gets at the end of the product, but what appears on the fashion catwalk.
So, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I don't want anyone to think that, like, a lot of the time, the things that walk down the catwalk are made the night before. And sometimes they are bodged. And, you know, I've seen pieces go down the runway where someone's like, oh, that's wrong. It needs to be black. And someone's got a Sharpie and they've literally coloured it in. Or like the crystals have run out and they can't get them and they need to like try and change the color of them. So they're painting them. Like all of that stuff happens and you are just confronted with the fact that you need to get it to the way it looks and just get it down that catwalk. Obviously what comes into the shop is much more like there's tests and there's like samples and there's a lot more time to try and get it right. And a lot of experimentation. You know, one of the bits in the book is about making your own sequins with like acrylic paint. And I had watched the video of Chanel making these sequins 100 times to try and work out how they'd done it. And I did so much research into it. And I did so many different samples of like exactly how to get the right balance of acrylic paint or acrylic ink or like glue or whatever. I've got, stacks of like things that went wrong. So yeah, there's definitely trial and error, research, development, all of it that goes into it. And often it's not as pretty as it looks going down the runway. It's just shoved off.
But kind of going back to your question about the disconnect, these pieces that are going down the runway, particularly at haute couture level or alta moda level, are the concept cars of fashion. You know, that no one's driving around in a Mercedes concept car. It's there to get your attention and show what they're capable of, what they can really do when they put their minds to it, and maybe where the future is heading. So haute couture is basically the concept car showcase for these fashion designers. And then there's multiple layers. Then there's high fashion, then there's ready to wear, and then there's high street, and there's upper high street and lower high street. So there's definitely a disconnect from your Primark t-shirt to your Chanel haute couture. There's no question about that. But that's not to say that the colour maybe isn't connected. Like if Chanel suddenly decide that we should all go for this duck egg blue and it's going to be so romantic and soft, you can be guaranteed that you'll find a duck egg blue t-shirt at Primark.
Is that disconnect between what turns up on the catwalk and what ends up in the show, is that a deliberate part of it? Is it almost like the catwalk is this sort of storytelling element then? It's just this opportunity to tell those tales and those will filter down like myths or like, I don't know, 10 commandments or something or other and get, like you say, get tested into reality.
To an extent, but also it's kind of just a ginormous advertising exercise in a big way. Because the haute couture industry existed specifically at one time. So rich women, and it was always women, would sit in those salons. They'd see the pieces go past. They'd be carrying a number and they'd say, I want number 9, but I want it like with sleeves. And it would be made to their body measurements perfectly. And they would pay top dollar for that. There's only a handful of people left in the world that are actually doing that. And most of the process is they do these big shows that we all see and we hear about, and that generates advertising, free advertising and beautiful pictures and kind of gets that name in the press. Secondly, they'll probably gift or remake or custom offer pieces to celebrities who then wear them. So that's another layer of advertising. But those people are rarely actually buying that. They're being gifted everything from the dress to the jewelry to the shoes. And that's all part of that advertising ecosystem. So in reality, what used to be a practical way of buying high-end clothes has almost entirely been transformed into a marketing and advertising message. People could argue this. This is not like 100%. There are still lots of people out there that spend a fortune on haute couture dresses, but I doubt it's enough to sustain the companies like it used to be.
Yeah, and is it, I mean, when you look at the examples in the book, are those more likely to be like one-of-one objects, like you say, like concept cars and stuff? Is there the likelihood of any of those being vaguely mass-produced?
Very little.
They would take, obviously, the catwalk show, the couture show, is a snapshot of what the upcoming collection will be in the shop. So it's not, as Robert said earlier, if it's a duck egg dress, I'm not talking about going into Primark, but they would take a pared back version of that takes elements, shapes, colours, some embroidery, the concept of it, that would then appear in the shop. So you're seeing an elaborated version in the highest quality possible, walking down that catwalk to inspire you to see what comes next into the shops.
But there are still some designers that are operating at haute couture. They don't have a ready-to-wear line. They don't even have a perfume. And they are, in theory, they're operating off investors and a few haute couture purchases. But the goal will always be to have a ready-to-wear line, to have a perfume, to have bags and accessories. So they can maybe operate for maybe as much as 10, 15 years off investor money and a little bit of those haute couture customers, the thin batch that still exists. But yeah, the goal will always be, we need to get something accessible.
So in some ways, what you're seeing on the catwalk are almost like the myths that are being created that then the world is constructed around.
Yes, 100%.
Right.
And you can see that with the last Matthew Blazy show. He was very much sort of signaling the direction he was going with Chanel. And it was very out of this world. Literally, it was like it was a solar system. And the clothes were bigger and brighter. There were more colours. It was a huge departure from previous Chanel shows. And it was a real statement of changes here. And then the biggest change that came through that everyone actually clocked when pieces were available to buy were that the prices were out of this world. The prices had shot up. So obviously these things are already expensive anyway, but yes, I think beautiful work if you could afford it.
All right, so this is a good one. So this feels like a question that's a bit of our times in. Like fashion, like you say, a lot of it is about the value. You look at the work, you understand the work's taken a long time to make. There's a lot of effort that's gone into it. And as you say, then the prices go out of this world. Yet, I'm buying my jeans on eBay, trying to get the best sort of value price that I can. It feels like you get this one realm where value and beauty and aesthetic is the everything. And then everybody else seems to be like trained to get the cheapest possible thing. And the concept of value becomes largely irrelevant because you look at fast fashion and you look at like, you know, mass produced stuff that falls apart and like nobody ever darns a sock because you don't need to. What's your take on the disconnect there? Is it so far apart now that it can't be resolved? What's your take?
Well, I talk about sustainability in fashion quite a bit, and I do think that it's depressing because at the bottom end, you're often kind of underpaying. And it's like the old farmers thing, you know, how can you possibly buy eggs for £1? Like, what's the farmer getting? And it's the same in fashion. You know, what is the person who's ultimately sewing together these shirts or making these socks? What are they getting when you're paying 50p for a pair of socks? It's a bizarre economy and it doesn't really work. But like you say, at the bottom end, we're all kind of scrambling to try and get a good deal. But at the top end, they have so much money that it doesn't even concern them and they can be buying these things. I think it's almost eat the rich time, isn't it? You don't really have another way to put it. Where's our French Revolution when we need it?
It does. It's not just the fashion industry that happens in. It's every industry, essentially. If you look at like interior furniture, you've got IKEA and then you've got everything else at the top. You know, you can buy a lamp for £4,500 if you wanted to, but you can also go to IKEA and buy it for 25 quid. And we all shop at IKEA, don't we?
Yeah. It's an interesting contrast, isn't it? I don't think there's an easy answer, isn't it? It's just an observation. You see almost like, I wonder whether, like you say, there is this disconnect, particularly this feeling these days as well. Like I keep thinking about Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez's wedding that was like 7 days in, like, and there's an ostentation there, isn't there? Now with a lot of the really rich, they just go, yeah, we've got loads of money and we're going to spend loads of money. And I guess that sustains the high end value, like you say, with investors and those kind of things. It's like in the complex, the system has got to that point, hasn't it, where there's a disconnect.
But I think in a way, if you think about it often as we do, which is that fashion is art, you are often going to see something that is an expression of art. All art is bought by rich people, but it can be enjoyed by everyone. we all need to wear a pair of jeans, but we don't need a pair of Valentino entirely embroidered jeans. They're a piece of art that maybe one person in the world can afford, but we can all enjoy. Yeah, I kind of see fashion, it has that corporate edge that can sometimes be a bit distasteful. Obviously, it has its associations with the extreme rich, which can be unpleasant, but ultimately it's created by artists and artisans, and that I think kind of grounds it and just about offsets the negatives for me.
Yeah, and also there's a lot in between the high and the low. There isn't just the Primark and the Gucci's, Balenciagas, and as Robert said, it is the artisans that are making it, and it's the craft. And although there is the distasteful rich, there is also the fact that they are supporting the craft and keeping that alive, and we are able to continue to innovate and evolve different techniques and use different materials. And if it wasn't for the money in there, we wouldn't be able to do that. So there's good and bad parts to it, I guess.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm really glad what you said a minute ago, Robert, because the other question that I had then was just, there's something about like, you look at some of the designers in the book and they're just making art. I feel like some of the designers there, that's just them using fashion as their medium because that's where they've ended up. So they make these ridiculous things. There was that you can't wear. Isn't there one that's just like, it looks like a firework that's gone off because it's just all of these.
Kevin Germanier, yes.
I couldn't stand up in it. You can't sit down in it, but it feels like it's an art piece that person had to make. And so for a lot of these things, the pieces that you show that have the most meaning are those one of one units. They're the least scalable. So in some ways, it almost feels like that end of couture embroidery is something that we just witness. We don't get to consume it. It's just there for us to look at. Is that right?
The Kevin Germanier piece that you're talking about is interesting on so many levels because it's also a commentary on sustainability, because he creates these wild embroideries, these impossibly beautiful and eye-catching pieces, and he is doing it all with found materials, recycled materials. He's got the balance now where he's creating these showcase pieces that get the press and get the attention and everyone goes, wow, but you can't sit in it. Imagine going around Tesco wearing that. And we make those jokes, but he's also selling a line of bags that have recycled beads, recycled elements. So it's not like he's just doing a sustainable spectacle and then, selling crap to the masses. It's in the DNA of his collections is the DNA of his ready-to-wear objects.
Yeah.
We love Kevin Germanier.
He was the last person we put in, wasn't he? I kept texting you being like, Robert, have you seen this? Quick, we need to get it in. We're handing in the book tomorrow.
As we were handing the book in as well, I think he just dropped a new collection and it was even more wow. And we were like, going to the publishers going, could we just, and they're going, no, you've had enough, stop. Because we just wanted to just slide one extra image in, but they weren't having it.
Yeah. It just seemed fascinating to me that you get to that fringe point where there are just those people that are making these things, and even they probably recognize, as you just said, they're not functional. It's just that's their expressive output. That's the medium that they've chosen. Is there a certain genre of couture embroidery that falls within that? Is that like the fine art version and the rest is like the art version? Do you know what I mean? Are there stratas to this that I don't understand?
I don't think so. I wouldn't say I've noticed that. I think different designers or different brands will play with silhouettes or the shape of the body or how to create a different image from someone walking down the catwalk. How does that reflect? How does that change this? How does this change that? It's all just about the expression of the designer, I guess. And
they express themselves just in the same kind of diversity as artists do. Like some artists are a bit conceptual, like Miuccia Prada. Like her clothes are very wearable, but there's always some kind of really intellectual thinking behind it. Like I think the last collection's kind of inspired by European women working in domestic services. So everything's a little bit utilitarian and there's lots of like yellow marigolds. But ultimately all the clothes are completely wearable, but she's got this huge intellectual artistic message that she's put into her collection. And there's other designers that are kind of at the opposite end of the scale entirely, like Michael Kors and the Row, where you don't come away with any kind of intellectual or artistic message, but the clothes are nice.
Or Schiaparelli.
Oh, Schiaparelli's like it's art, it's linked to art, it's intellectual art. She was called disparagingly by Chanel as that Italian artist that makes clothes.
Yeah.
That was intended as an insult, apparently. They hated each other, Chanel and Schiaparelli. But yeah, Schiaparelli and Alexander McQueen are often framed as artists that just happen to be working in fashion.
And you can see her inspiration is so inspired by surrealism, and you can see that playing out. Obviously now it's not her, but they still carry that theme through. And she was friends with Dali, wasn't she?
Yes.
Yeah.
Possibly more.
Possibly more. They were all mates, weren't they?
Well, apart from Chanel and Schiaparelli, she has this story where she was at a party together, Chanel and Schiaparelli, and she tried to maneuver Schiaparelli into a lit flame to set her on fire. That's love.
That's class. That is.
That's fashion.
What sort of what period are we talking about then? When would that have been?
That would have been the 1930s. Basically, they were the interwar period, Schiaparelli and Chanel and Dior. And Schiaparelli went. That business basically floundered after the Second World War and was restarted recently. Chanel, obviously, absolutely carried on successfully. One of the sad things about Christian Dior that most people don't realize is, I think most of us know 1947, he exploded onto the scene with the new look and kind of created an optimism and vibrancy that France very much needed after the war. But he died in 1957. He only got to ride that wave for 10 years. So Christian Dior as a brand is so famous, but he himself really only was the head of that brand in his own lifetime for 10 years.
That I don't think that means anything. I found out a recent fact today. How long do you think the Spice Girls were at their peak?
Oh, yeah.
Wow, pivot.
Operate, as in like how long did they make music for?
10 years? 8 years?
No, 3. Yeah.
Really?
Little Mix, 10.
Do you know, but the Beatles, 8. The Beatles did all of their albums and that inside of 8 years. And you just like, there's a band, oh God, the Avalanches, who I really like, 14 years between albums. Could have got 2 lots of the Beatles out then. Yeah, sometimes. And that's like, so with stuff like that, you know, the legacy, is it that these designers were incredibly smart business people as well? Because I feel like there's the trade, isn't there? There's the economic success and then the creative success. And as we see, I guess, with some of the designers you're showing, they're plugged into the existing economic structures that have gone before. Is that right?
I think it's horses for courses. Schiaparelli is an example of someone who wasn't financially great, kind of got there. Chanel was someone who was always financially, she was always thinking about the bottom line. She negotiated with her embroiderers and switched embroiderers to someone who was like a Russian emigre princess who was down on her luck because she was cheaper. So, some people are very, very business savvy. Others, if you look at John Galliano, if you read the stories about him, he very much relied on partners that were good at the money side of things because he was not. And as is the way with so many fantastic artists. So I think there's almost a kind of a look to it in the long run. If you end up being a Louis Vuitton, one of the most famous brands in the world, where you start from as a luggage designer, there's just so many fortunate things that happened along that path to land you where you are today.